So to give you a little bit more context in terms of the challenges, I think, I'll show my age here a little bit as well as my colleague did in the beginning. I was here, sitting in a computer lab in Indiana when we were hit with one of the first few kinds of viruses. Right? Back then they were viruses, then they evolved into worms and things like that. I was there when NIMDA and Code Red and all these things started happening. I was based out of the Bay Area. Sitting at eBay, my first, in fact, my second meeting at Cisco, sitting in the eBay office or the lobby for about 2.5 hours until they finally came and grabbed us and said, Cisco, we're being hacked, can you guys help us? And that was the big denial of service. You guys remember the big denial of service attacks that eBay and some of the large e-commerce organizations were facing back in 2000? I was right in the middle of it. My first experience of a SOC was actually that day. And I've always been hooked since then. So, and I've been there at Shamoon, I've been there in all the other instances. So the key point of this slide is really to try and explain that, the sophistication and the impact that the attackers are using and they're having is consistently changing over time. I think we talked a little bit about not just the type of attack, but then the impact. I care more about the impact, to be honest. You can change your tools, you can change from virus to malware, that's fine. But ultimately, how does that affect me as a CISO and my organization? That's ultimately what it boils down to. And as you can see, the number and the types of records and the breaches that have increased are exponential. And what we're starting to realize is their tactics, techniques, and procedures have completely evolved in time as well. Hackers are lazy, so they like to automate as much as possible, and they are automating in this day and age. Virtually most of the attacks that we've been tracking, and we track a lot of adversary groups around the world, most of the adversary groups that we track are running campaigns that are using automated, not just scripts, but even in some cases, basic machine learning algorithms in order to generate attacks against their victims. And that, unfortunately, is going to be on the rise. We are very much, unfortunately, at the other end of that table tennis table. We are fighting an automated battle. I think everyone in this room should probably agree to that, especially my friends in the first two tables, because you guys are talking about automation. But the sad part about this is the poor chap at the other end doesn't have the capabilities to battle the automation, because they're very manual in the way they go about doing things. And again, the gentleman from Tata talked a little bit about automation. I think automation is extremely important, because the next level of attackers could be these. I don't know, how many people here have heard of the DARPA initiative? Right, so I see a couple of hands. So you guys are aware that DARPA has a cyber grand challenge every second year. Right? And the last time they ran, Mayhem was the machine that worked. What's interesting is the attacks are all generated through machines. Now, yes, these are machine learning systems. I don't want to pretend like this is Skynet, artificial intelligence and all that other stuff. But ultimately, we will get there, because every other year when they run this initiative, the machines get faster at capturing the flags that have been set for them. And so ultimately, we will live in a world where these systems can be autonomously understanding our environment, understand the user, understand the department that we're in, our administrative assistants, and then generate attacks specifically based on our social presence and our overall existence on the internet or on the cloud. I thought I'd share this, and I changed my slide a little bit after the gentleman's presentation, and I really appreciated some of the topics that you brought up in the beginning as well. Especially because you repeated some of the stuff that I was about to do. So you helped me kind of with that challenge. Thank you. I thought I'd share a little bit about the CISO, right? So these are the people, as I said, that I talk to. This is my job in the company. I'm an external-facing CISO, which is kind of unique, and it's a bit of a fun job because I'm not tied to sales, so I can still talk about other vendors. What I thought I'd do is I'd kind of share what are the priorities that a typical CISO typically has, right? And you guys can probably come to terms with some of this. So GRC is important. The SOC we've been talking about, ID access management, end user applications, data infrastructure, and a whole host of other things. But when I start thinking about the problem, if I apply the NIST framework and I start looking at what are the tools that I need to prepare my organization for cybersecurity, these are some of the key things that I come up with. Obviously, GRC is very big. Some of the awareness programs here, like phishing readiness and security awareness, obviously is pretty big. Some of these are processes. Some of these are tools that we can leverage. When I think about protect, the landscape changes completely. All sorts of different tools that I need in order to protect, depending on where my data is. And the problem is I don't know where my data is, majority of the time. Right? I can't sit in a room with a single CISO that I've met in the last 20 years who can tell me that they know exactly where their data is stored, where it's transferred, where it's moving, and how it's protected. It just doesn't happen. There's a continuous sort of data classification exercise that organizations run when they go on this journey. When I think about detection, of course, the SOC is pretty important. Similarly for response, and then similarly for recovery. These are some of the key areas. But the point I'm trying to make with this slide, and the point I'm trying to get everyone in this room to have a consensus with me on, is that there are too many vendors. There are too many products. On average, I just showed you about 65 different products and or services that you and your organization would be using. Now, yes, Palo Alto Networks can map ourselves on a couple of these things. We can't do everything. And we absolutely agree that that's a challenge. How many of you attend the RSA Cybersecurity Conference in San Francisco? Anyone here? A couple of people? So there's this big sort of gathering of cybersecurity professionals, and if you are in the cybersecurity world, then please talk to your bosses and make sure that you get approval to fly up. It happens in San Francisco sometime in February. I've attended almost the last 18 of those conferences. I used to be based in San Francisco, so obviously I was lucky there. But then even when I moved back to Dubai about 10 years ago, I go back every year. So when my first RSA conference back in 2001, I had about 50 security vendors. Cisco was there, Checkpoint, Juniper, and a few others. This year, in February when I went there, guess how many vendors there were? 1,000? 2,500. Spread over 3 massive halls. And it felt, I kid you not, like a fish market. Everyone had something unique. Everyone had something that they wanted for you to focus on. And as a CISO, and as with the delegation that I was with other CISOs, they were all being pulled in different directions because they found something cool that they wanted. And the problem fundamentally is, as my friend from Tata said in the morning, is siloed, non-integrated, and in some cases, not giving you the visibility that you need in your environment. This is ultimately the biggest challenge that we have. Did you have a question?
On this event, more than 1,000 was only startup.
Sure.
Having an idea to develop and looking for capital.
Sure, yeah. Doesn't mean they weren't cybersecurity focused, right? They're still startups. And as I said, they have those niche things that they want to offer, right? Something very unique in the market, like a special form of container security that, frankly, maybe 20 other vendors are also offering. So that's the challenge. I'll skip through this very quickly. You guys will get a copy of the slides. You'll see we essentially share our belief with the way Tata talked about earlier. Obviously, gaps, 30 plus is the average. I've sat across a CISO who had about 200 cybersecurity vendors in his environment, and his main KPI for the year was to bring, for the next 2-3 years, was to go from 200 to 100. That's how he was measuring success. So that's an unfortunate one of the key things that we look at. And then this is a question I think we asked right before lunch. What do you do in terms of incident response, right? So what are the key, how many analysts are involved? What type of processes do you follow? Ultimately, this is the challenge that you go through. And unfortunately, the projector is not very clear. But as you'll see, from the moment I start receiving a news alert or an indicator of compromise, the CISO obviously has his or her set of questions. And obviously, there are different teams that are involved in accessing different ones. This actually popped up on a whiteboard. So we whiteboarded this initially to try and figure out, what is the actual process that we're using. And this is the pain that most organizations go through, including those of yourself. And why do we see that? We see it because we're focused on the wrong areas. One of the questions I think we asked, and we will probably ask you as well, is what if you could automate, what would you automate? And I think we answered a few of the questions on the tables. The problem is the types of threats are different. On the one side, you've got what we refer to as known threats, right? The known knowns that we talked about in the morning. And on the other side, we have the unknown unknowns, right? Which is the sort of the targeted attacks, right? The low and slow type of individuals, campaigns that are running against organizations. Our SOC analysts are focused on the far left-hand side of this diagram. They spend way too much time manually focused on that stuff. They never get to this stuff. And most of the time you focus on outsourcing some company or some threat feed or something to help you here, which quite frankly isn't effective enough. So that's one of the key things we go through. So having talked about the challenges, what's the right approach? And this is where I bring in Patrick. Obviously, the right approach focuses on prevention. You have already invested in the technology that will allow you to do prevention. I'm not going to stand here as a cybersecurity professional and say, go buy Palo Alto and that's the only vendor that can do prevention. There are plenty of others that will do prevention. You have already invested in the technology. If you have a next-gen firewall, or if you have an endpoint, if you have some sort of protection capabilities on the cloud, all you need to do is turn those prevention capabilities on. Right? But you won't do it. Why? Confidence, false positives. The ability of the question that we asked earlier about automation, right? If you could, would you turn it on? And unfortunately, that's one of the key challenges that we run into. The other area that we run into is, if I do turn it on, and if it breaks something, obviously I'm the one who's held liable. So that's one of the key things that we help overcome. The second, obviously, AI and machine learning, as my friend said, I can't be standing up here if I don't talk about AI and machine learning. That was interesting. But even if you do a basic level of machine learning, it's enough. There is no such thing as an artificially intelligent computer or cybersecurity tool that exists in the market today. I'm the first one to tell you that. Because in order to do AI, you need vast amounts of storage, and you need vast amounts of computer networking, and you need a cognitive capability that allows you to understand what's what. Without machine biased, without all sorts of different issues. It doesn't exist. There are vendors that are in that space. We're doing it as well. We're on that journey. Nobody's there yet. And then last thing, of course, is the automation for investigations, which is where I will hand over to Patrick.
Lovely job. Yeah. Thank you very much. So yeah, hopefully I won't bore you too much. Has everyone heard of the SOAR acronym? Anyone not heard of it? Sorry, I'd say. Put your hand up. Good. Oh, you haven't. Okay, we'll touch on it quickly. Bless Gartner, they've given us another 4-letter acronym. Perfect. We were running out of them, right? So S is security. That's where the budget is. Essentially, we're more of a DevOps tool, but funnily enough, DevOps never seem to have any budget. So we exist now within the security space. So orchestration is our ability to talk to other platforms. I can create file rules, update file rules, add hashes to endpoint security technologies, whitelist files, all from within Misto. So our orchestration capabilities means we can reach other platforms within Misto. Scripts and automation, ideally they'd be automated, but scripts you can run standalone. And again, you would combine automation and orchestration together so that you could automate the response to things. When we had the previous exercise, the guy who's looking at his phone, we asked the question about what would you... we said, what would you like to automate? And he said, leavers and joiners. We actually have a playbook. When I joined Misto, we kick off a playbook that adds people to Active Directory, gives them the right permissions, creates a request for them in Exchange, creates a laptop request for them, and emails the manager at the end to say, here you go, it's done. Before I joined Misto, shouldn't have done that. Before I joined Misto, I had my laptop 2 weeks before I started. That's never, ever happened in anywhere I've ever worked before. So
before you signed the contract, you got your laptop?
Not before I signed the contract. That'd be silly. I mean, because I wouldn't have joined. I'd have just taken a laptop. But no, my 2 weeks before my start date, I had a delivery at home. My laptop was there because the automation capabilities was well defined, and I received my laptop. So
I've got a question. I apologize. I have to take a bit of a break.
That's fine.
Automation is brilliant. Orchestration is amazing. How many of your clients, and it may have been asked before, how many of your clients are using it for protective action rather than just kind of doing stuff that doesn't impact service? Am I making sense?
Yep.
Changing firewall rules.
Sorry? Yeah, as in, I've detected something, take this offline, and it's a rule that works always.
Yep.
Don't care about business disruption. I mean, you should care, but...
You should, yeah.
I want to know the percentage if you can.
Yeah, or do you have any kind of stats?
There's no percentage on that. It really, so the customers I speak to, and I'm aligned to the major accounts, so I speak to banks. I think with the Misto, you can complete if something is missed by your antivirus, or if there's a machine that's done a callback and you want to then add the IP address to your firewall, you can completely automate that.
No, I know.
Okay, but hear me out.
Yeah.
But you would be out of your mind if you used full automation for that. You would always want a human to review that and say, maybe it's Google harvesting or being a drive-by download. So you might not want to add 8.8.8.8 to your firewall rule as your blacklist.
Why can't I review after I've blocked?
You can do. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm asking. So
yeah.
Are people? What I'm trying to understand is, are people saying, depending on severity, block, then review, rather than review, then block.
People are
Am I making sense in
you are
that?
making complete sense, yeah. The organisation I'm speaking to, I think it's still the legacy mindset of IDS, IPS. Nobody wants to
That's
enforce
what
that.
I'm trying to get.
Yeah, so I don't think anybody wants to enforce. FireEye, sandboxes, when they came out, there's still nobody, hardly
I know,
anyone.
We're all putting in detecting mode.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So it's the same concept, but now with the Misto, they're using that to say, before I go and make a change, at least I have a higher degree of accuracy, and I still can have a human have eyes on it and say, approve.
Wow. So despite all of this amazing automation,
Yep.
are you seeing the same thing?
I just
Sorry,
wanted
if
to
I may.
have,
No, it's fine.
just to give another perspective of it. Now we're talking about SOAR related to firewall and IPS IDS. It is little risky in terms of starting with this one. Now, best possible way you can start SOAR. Let's say your URL filtering, right? If a proxy, you are getting your users are going to some malicious site, and it needs to be blocked in the URL filtering application. You can very well easily integrate to start with. That means it is not going to disrupt your business.
No, I understand.
This is one.
Yeah.
Second one is for the firewall part, right? This is the right approach, but he's mentioning the semi-automatic. That's my terminology.
Which is user review.
User
and then,
review. That means
Yeah.
whole process is taken care of. Only thing is one guy who is going to look into the business impact analysis. That means
Yep.
he has got a list of IP addresses. I know these are my partner IP address where I have created my link. I am doing my business. If that bad reputed IP is not in this list, I can very well go and ask my SOAR, go and implement it. Then
Yep.
you have got 200 firewalls, automatically in one go it is implemented.
Yeah, so a lot of the customers, if they don't have the full-on automation of make that change, they will tee up the firewall rule, but then they won't have the commit at the end. And maybe they'll have a report get sent out to a CISO or the data owner or someone to say, this is what we've done, do you want to make the commit? And you would do that manually. So there's still a degree of ownership, maybe trust, maybe the confidence that Haidar talked about that, you know.
Again, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, it's good.
To me, because for me, rapid response is the keyword.
Completely agree.
Everyone does incident response.
Yep.
Okay, there's no one in this
Yep.
room or in this world that doesn't do incident response.
Yep.
The problem is no one is doing rapid incident response.
Yep.
And that's what I'm trying to get. Maersk is a brilliant, everyone knows Maersk, right?
Yep.
Boring, highly profitable company.
Had a bit of a breach.
Massive, right? If they had this thing about block everything, but oh wait, let me go ahead and ping someone, approve,
Yeah.
then block. I mean,
So
they
in-
still would have had the issue.
So I agree with you. If my only counter argument to that would be and as I mentioned this in the beginning as well, it's a matter of confidence. If I can say at a 90% certainty that this is bad and it should be blocked, I should be blocking it, right? And if that means one product or two products or SOAR or firewall or whatever, I should be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
I'll take the 10% hit, right? Depending on the criticality. And some vendors and some customers are down that journey and they're doing that. The challenge is how do you get to that 90%? Because that's not where everybody is right
This
now.
is a headache, because
right?
if it's a false positive, you might lose your job.
Yes,
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. So
Another thing, does it depend on the policy, like your security plan or the IR planning when you are doing, like as the gentleman said, like first you have to do block and then review, instead of review and then block. It depends on the policy, who is your CTO.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean,
Right, exactly. Executive appetite.
Yeah.
honestly speaking, it's not just policy, it's culture.
Culture.
It's more how you see it from a culture perspective. If your culture says, no, I need to be the middle guy and I need to approve and say yes, then fine. And we have an app where the guy can look and say right then on the spot to approve or whatever. But at the end of the day, yes, it's a cultural issue. It's not.
That you cannot fire a framework if something goes wrong.
Exactly.
You know who to fire.
accountability, right? Yeah.
I've wanted to
accountability.
fire so many frameworks in my life.
Wait, but that's the reason you block first, so you can't fire anyone.
Look,
No, I think.
Go on,
yeah,
sorry.
If I would look at, it depends on the severity of that particular issue,
Right.
right? So you've been attacked, you're 100% sure attack is coming from this particular IP, and it is impacting the XYZ services.
But would you-
But sure, I will block that because
Automatically
in the
or
interest
not?
of the organization, I'm doing that.
I
Go on.
basically think the difference between why block and then review and then block is, are we as human beings
comfortable or at a level today in the world to let a machine make a decision.
That's why I remember there was a
on
question
half
about, are you
Yeah.
distrustful of automation? Because that was
That's
Yep.
the whole
leading
point.
to this question.
We
Yeah.
are living in an AI world, we are
Yeah.
living in a cognitive world,
Yeah.
but the level of adoption across the organization today, and I would put it at 90-10, is I will not let a machine make a
Yeah.
decision for me. It's not at that level of
Can
superiority.
I be the devil's advocate? Well, not even just the devil's advocate, but
Sure.
my issue goes back to then rapid incident response is not truly possible.
It-
I think
Because
it's-
you're still waiting for someone, if that guy's in the loo,
Yeah.
I mean, most people take their phone to the loo, it's a very bad
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Right, if that guy's in the loo and he's not looking at the app, and the app has popped up saying approve this, right, change because of a really bad malware floating around, and he doesn't approve the change for 20 minutes, the worst will happen.
Amar, like
Sorry.
at the start, you said nobody complains when everything's going right. You could do that, automate 10 of those. One of them goes wrong, you block something bad.
still get
Security's name is mud. Security are not an enabler at that point. Everything you've done is wrong. So I think there's definitely exactly.
It's a fine line, in
Yeah.
my opinion. I mean, and we can move on because I'm sensitive of the time as well.
No,
But
we're managing the time, don't worry.
okay,
Yes,
this,
yes.
as long as you don't kick us off at the end.
This is part of the debate.
So the ultimately for us, and this is, I'll give you an example of how we do it at Palo Alto, right?
Right.
So we look at the criticality of the asset, right?
Yes.
Then we look at the criticality of the incident. If it's high, then obviously you want someone to say yes before the prevention happens. If it's low-high, then it's automated. If it's medium somewhere, then
Low critical asset,
low critical, you can prevent it.
yes.
Do it completely automatic. If it's high, then you need someone very quickly to go in and say that there it's not incident, it's not rapid incident
Right.
response, but because of the
Considered
criticality.
internet
That's right.
response.
And as security professionals, right, we're less risk averse. So we'd be automating that every time. Take the risk, we'll deal with the risk, right? But the business isn't always on our side. They'll be like a travel agent I spoke to the other day. They were like, this is like the Wild West. Don't make any changes. Security are not a function of the business. They're there to do what we say.
So I tell you why I bring this up, okay? Everyone knows about, guys, please focus here if you don't mind. Everyone knows about WannaCry, correct?
A little bit.
Now, WannaCry is interesting because when WannaCry hit UK, NHS, someone I know, 800 people organization, he made his decision. He saw what was happening, and he disconnected a certain part of whatever service
Mhm.
without, or as in based on the threat,
Mhm.
right? Without any authority, okay? He got into trouble. He had to go and justify his action. But because it hit the media and it became a huge thing, management took a decision saying, okay, you know what, at that point you made the right call.
Yep.
In his mind, he was making a call because it was actually opposite of what you're saying. He made it was a high critical service, high threat level, and he didn't wait for change management approval. He didn't wait for management. He couldn't get
He just
anyone
did
on the call. He pulled the plug.
Yeah.
And he survived,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
He didn't get fired.
Yeah.
Right? So it's an interesting.
But that was still a human decision.
Agreed. It was a human decision. It was an automation.
Yeah. And I would argue that he was still the person who was in charge of making that change.
He had to.
He didn't rely on the machine to do it for him, right? At what point do you let the machine take that decision versus involving a human, which is what
Which
you're
is why
talking
I had
about.
the question: will that ever happen in the
Yeah.
near future? I don't think so.
Because
Well,
you
it
know,
will
full
be an
compliance.
evolution.
It will happen.
It'll be an evolution.
Of automatic.
It's going to be an evolution
It has
of
to
what we
happen.
have today.
It has to
It's
happen.
going to be an evolution of the SOAR.
Of what is happening right now.
Yeah.
Currently, it's happening in the automotive industry, right? You look at an autonomous car. If you're sitting behind the wheel and not touching it, and there's a person that's crossing the street, who takes the action, the human being or the machine? You want the machine to do it because it's real time. It's in that instance.
The more you
Should the
learn,
machine apply the brake?
the faster you learn.
No, I understand.
Right? And not just that, but with the comparison though that I think we talked about on the table a couple of, or maybe about an hour ago, was the comparison though is in the machine, of the autonomous machine world, you have visibility through the sensors, you have integration through everything from the brake pedal to the computer to everything that's happening, so there's integration there. You have control mechanisms that the machine has access to, so it can immediately take that action. We don't have that in the cybersecurity world,
Yes.
specifically integration. We don't have the confidence to say, I've got 5 vendors in my environment, down from 30, who are all fully integrated across my technology stack.
Yeah.
And now I can let the AI or whatever machine learning system or automation system to make that change.
Correct.
Right? So that's fundamentally the issue.
One analogy for if automation is actually working today itself. Let's say for DDoS attack, if you give 15 minutes time, the attack magnitude can go up to terabytes. So what you do, you cannot wait for a person to approve that on start the mitigation, right? It is almost automated. That you have got 17 types of attacks. As of now, you have learned. Let's say new type of attack has come up. There has to be a mechanism that it's learning this new variant of the attack, and it machine takes decision that if I see the attack is this getting little higher, immediately I need to take action to start mitigation. Now you think about it, if the mitigation is wrong, and then the whole infrastructure can get choked. That you are actually creating a DDoS attack on your own. But still, you have to open up. You have to take a call. Probably 99.99% times it is perfect. One time there is a possibility. But what you are doing is you are taking this call to make the organization run automatically, and it has saved you 99 times.
Yeah.
And one time there is a problem, you have to accept it.
And it goes
is based on the culture of the organization.
exactly.
The challenge back to that is DDoS is probably the most simplistic of tasks to automate. If you look at more complex attacks, look at MageCart, for example, recently come out, where scripts in open AWS S3 buckets were replaced with card skimming data. There is no amount of automation that can actually detect that, and there has to be, it was caught because of human intervention. Somebody reported to their supplier, I'm getting weird behavior on your website. When they start investigating it, they found obfuscated code, and when it all went wide, more than 17,000 websites were compromised. Well, it was discussed, and it's still an ongoing campaign being run at the moment. So there is a huge amount of limitation, and that comes to the cognitive ability of AI. We don't have AI. We have very advanced ML at this point in time. AI
Very advanced, I would say.
Okay, yeah.
Advanced.
We've got an advanced ML
Yeah.
at the moment, and we discussed this at table as well. Fully cognitive AI needs really good data sets to feed into it.
Yeah.
We just don't have that.
We don't have those data.
We don't have
Yeah.
that. We are quite a far distance, and it's going to be very expensive, even if it comes out. You want to leverage IBM Watson for your SOC? Ask them for a code. It'll blow your mind how much money it's going to cost. So yeah.
Cool.
There you go.
Well, I'm glad we covered that SOAR definition in really quickly.
He was going to spend 10 seconds on the slide.
You have time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
This is the objective of Wisdom of Crowds is,
Yeah.
talk at us. Cool.
sorry?
Talk at us.
Yes, and discuss. And
Yeah,
learn.
of course.
Yeah. And disagree. That's the best part.
Yeah. So in terms of how Misto works, so I like to describe Misto as your level 1 analyst, and that's indeed how Palo Alto Networks use Misto. They're a customer of Misto. They have 8 guys on shift. They ingest something like a billion events per quarter, and they were struggling with false positives, everything we've talked about, false positives, alert fatigue, troubleshooting, not doing enough hunting, not being proactive, and they've pivoted to be more automated. So those 8 analysts now have reduced it down to about, I'm told, 8.3 alerts per day that they get, which is 1 alert per analyst for those who struggle with maths. The rest of their time, they're enriching their use cases, they're proactively threat hunting, and the Palo Alto SOC only runs 8 till 5. So, like I say, Misto is their level 1 analyst.
SOC only runs 8 to 5.
Yeah,
They've
we're
got
8 to
Misto
5.
as their level 1
And
analyst.
for your own company.
Correct.
For,
yeah.
yeah. So
And imagine,
That is very interesting.
So to give you a quick history on Palo Alto SOC, we ran, when we started our SOC, we actually had about 20 people.
Okay.
We were 24/7. We were L1, L2, L3. We were using the old traditional way, right? When we incorporated Misto and we incorporated Cortex, which I'll talk about a little bit later, we managed to use the automation to bring the number of detection analysts down. So basically what that means is, whatever the L1 SOC analyst is doing is now being automated using the playbooks.
Got it.
Right, so Misto does that for us. Then what we did was the people who, there were roughly, I'd say maybe 10 or so people that we had, we changed their job description into moving outside of just purely detection and also doing hunting. So some of them actually spend half of their time on hunting and half of their time on detection. And we changed that landscape, and we're now 8 by 5, which is enough.
hugely beneficial to businesses. When I worked in the SOC, I would blow my brains out just working on false positives all day, or boring things. Everyone in the SOC wants to be the hero, the hunter. They want to find the APT in there. They don't want to be working on a phishing email for 2 days. They really, trust me, it's boring. So Yeah, we integrate with a ton of stuff. Like Haidar mentioned, we're part of Palo Alto Networks, right? But I will go into customers who either don't have Palo Alto Networks, and obviously the larger customers will have Palo Alto Networks, and one other. It's like, okay, well, how do you make your changes? There's two different teams that make my changes to my two different firewalls. Well, how does that scale? You know, if I've got one IP address that I want to add to two different firewalls, how do you do that? Well, we change request a week later, they'll come back, tell us it's incomplete, we'll have to do it again. So the point is, we can automate that. The way that Misto automation works is take an IOC and do something with it in multiple places at once. So feed it to both firewalls, or feed it to your, I don't know, F5, your EDR, your endpoint security, whatever you've got, you can feed it to multiple places at once. So take that reaction. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Good. I'll take the nods. So when we break Misto down, we do it into 3 different areas. The first off is an automation engine. It's GUI-based. You don't have to script your automations because we've already done it for you out of the box. I've never created a playbook from scratch. I'll use one of the ones that's out of the box, rip them apart. If there's a GDPR one, I know there's a lot of communication with non-IT folk, then I'll just use that one if I'm using a communication playbook. I sent Haidar a playbook that I did the other day where he wanted to automate his responses to emails. I actually did that. I was training sales guys on what Misto is, and I created a very simple playbook. I added my sales guys into a list. Anytime they emailed me, I'd parse out the content. If there was a question mark in the body of the email, I'd just say, can I get back to you on that one? So buy myself some time. If there was no question mark, I'd just reply back and said, thanks.
That's the most important thing I've learned today.
There you go. Sales guys are very simple people. It's usually, Patrick, can you jump on a demo? Patrick, can we get me this customer?
Can I get back to you?
That's it. So I can happily share that playbook for you. That's now my personal information, but I can share that. But yeah, it's one of the use cases, levers and joiners. We do that completely automated. A cloud POC as well. If our DevOps team was spending about 2 hours creating cloud POCs. Now, because we've got integration with AWS, Azure, GCP, someone here requested a cloud POC. We press a button. We look up for a fresh host name. We prepend that to .demisto.works. We'll allocate the compute power. We'll add the users, add the license, then email you that it's done within a second. Like, let's say 10 seconds. A lot quicker than 2 hours. So really, the limitation with Misto is your imagination and the vendor APIs.
So it's also being used for not just response.
Yep.
But things
we use it for everything.
Provisioning.
Yep.
Operational.
Yep. Yep. Customer I dealt with the other day, vulnerability scans. They were making a nuisance of themselves in security because they were bored of chasing the people responsible, the desktop and server team for patching. So the vulnerability scans that they were running weekly, every time he didn't update a patch, they'd email him. And then after 3 failed attempts, they'd email his manager. Patching cycles came down a lot quicker, funnily enough, when we implemented that for them. So anyway, I digress. But yeah, playbook editor, all the scripts out of the box, all the actions out of the box that you can build, copy without having to be a coder, which is hugely beneficial because SOCs have a lot of skills. They're not necessarily coders in my experience in every case, having worked there. Ticketing. If your security teams are part of your business and having to prove your value to business, which was my pain once a year when I had to say what great work I'd done every year when I worked at HSBC Bank, we have all the metrics out of the box, and you can see very quickly, I hate the term ROI, but it's very quick to say, oh, we've reduced from these type of incidents from a day to an hour, or a day to 10 minutes. So all that's very important to a lot of customers. We talked about dashboarding, reporting. Give exec management a report, a pretty graph. They love that. Tick, you're doing your job. Thank you very much. They don't know what it means, but we do that out of the box. And collaboration. So that's one of the things that we found as well, and having from working in a SOC. If I finished my shift at 5 and America came on board and they wanted to carry over the ticket, or maybe if I was a level 2 analyst and I had to escalate it to a level 3 analyst, they'd do the same some of the same things again.
What's the image, sorry, in this context? What's the image about?
So we've got a virtual war room within Misto. If you've ever been in a security incident, everyone runs into a room, figures out what the hell we do, everyone panics a bit, drinks a lot of coffee, and then goes again. We've got that concept in Misto because you'll see all the artifacts, all the scripts, all the automations that I've run output to the war room, so that if I call in Haidar to the incident, because as my level 3 analyst, he can go, all right, Patrick's done all this, the scripts have done all this, so I know where to carry on. I'm looking at this host, this is the infected host, or this is the hash that I need to look at. So that's the concept of the war room in Misto. You learn from it as well. If you've got junior analysts, you can output everything in the related to that incident, and it's a nice, everyone loves a circle.
Can I just add one point to the virtual war room? So there's a There's a use case to this which we can share if you're interested. But there's a CERT in Europe that recently collaborated with the CERT in Singapore. So they found something during their investigation. They didn't know what exactly it was, but they had the contact of the CERT in Singapore because they believed it was coming different platform. So they were using Demisto. In Singapore, they didn't have Demisto. That particular entity didn't have Demisto.
Right.
So as the analyst was searching what was going on, he essentially sent a message via Demisto to collaborate with the CERT in Singapore. They opened up an international view of Demisto.
It's almost
and
like a Slack.
it's exactly like a
It's
Slack.
just like Slack.
And the two of them started collaborating, and we actually have the view, obviously not the information, we have the view of them then collaborating and working together to figure out
Can
what's
you
happening.
share that?
Yeah, sure.
I'll share that with the audience.
Yeah.
Yes,
Is that okay?
of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, Slack is something that we natively integrate with. So again, you get maybe CISOs who wouldn't use a Demisto. So you maybe just send them, communicate with them on Slack. Do you want to approve this firewall change on Slack? Or here's the incident. All this stuff that's outstanding. We've got integration with Slack as well.
So with
Yep.
this scenario, you're saying it was Europe talking to or
The
pinging a
Singapore CERT. The person clicked on the link that was sent via email from Demisto. They launched onto the Demisto International License Platform.
Right.
And then they were connected with the guy in
And
Europe.
dealing with the same
They were on the same chat. They had the same chat window. They were sharing data, IOCs, blah, blah, blah. And then they basically
And once the
collaborated.
incident is done,
You
kick
cut
them
off.
out.
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. This slide renders really well, but one of our customers talked to us about before and after Demisto. And what you can see here is it's obviously sped up, but they're working on an incident. They're working with ServiceNow, the ticketing system. They're working with threat intelligence. They're updating a bunch of different things, different tools. You probably have these experiences internally. Maybe you've got an antivirus system here, your threat intelligence here, your firewall here. And there's a lot of copying, pasting. There's a lot of dead time in doing these tasks. And I'm going to just quickly carry on because I don't like that one. But with Demisto, everything is automated in the platform. It's a lot more straightforward. There's no need to switch screens. You have one screen up. If you have to work on a case, you bring in other people into the case. You can communicate with your threat intelligence. You can get information from your sandboxes. If there's a hash, send it to your sandbox, send it to your threat intel. If there's a sample, send it to your sandboxes. You might have multiple different ones from multiple different vendors. No problems. Demisto's integrations talk the languages of the different platforms. And from experience, like security analysts, they won't understand the syntax on a Palo Alto firewall or a checkpoint firewall. They might understand one, but they probably won't understand 10 different products. With Demisto, you really don't need to.
Patrick, can you just quickly touch on the little bot down there at the bottom left?
Down the bottom? Yeah, so...
the bot, the automated bot, yeah.
Yeah, so we're contractually obliged to talk about machine learning. Thank you. So the machine learning we use in Demisto is unsupervised machine learning, which means over time, Demisto gets smarter about the type of instance and the IOCs that you have on your environment. So let's say I've closed down 5 phishing emails. Next time Haidar's working on an incident and he starts to work on it, he'll get a suggestion in Demisto that says, why don't you allocate it to Patrick and maybe these other guys who've worked on similar incidents? Or we've seen these IOCs in other places. Here's the incident numbers for it. So it does get smarter over time. It just speeds up the analyst. We're trying to reduce that MTTR as low as possible. And these just like some, machine learning in that consent works quite well that we find.
You may already have touched on this, or I'm sure you have it built in, but can I show management a simple KPI saying, listen, I know the video is good, but this is what it's taken me in year 1 to detect and respond.
Yep.
And by the year, I don't know, year 2 or 3, I've bought down, and this is how efficient I've become.
Yeah, and you can't not just only show them an ROI for the number of analysts that you've saved, which is easy, but what you can show them more importantly is the analysts that you do have, how much more productive they've become. There's a fancy algorithm that gets calculated, and actually when you log into the portal, per analyst. So you can actually, when you log in, there's a number at the top right-hand side that will constantly tell you, as an analyst, how much money you've saved based on the automation that you've done and the way that you've optimized the way your workflows do.
Yeah, there's a widget in the dashboard that says, saved by Demisto, dollar value.
Okay, interesting.
Yep. And because I'm English, I change it from $1 to a pound sign.
Although in the next few months, it's just my one-to-one.
Yeah, some parity, yeah. Yeah.
Let's hope it doesn't become that. The way it's going is.
So out of the box, I mentioned we've got loads of different integrations. There's, I think, 120 or so, but we have a content development team which is driven by customer demand. Let's say there's a technology today that we don't integrate with. Customer A says we need that. Then our content development team does that. We also do professional services if you're interested, but you don't have to be a hardcore coder to create these integrations and to create playbooks. But we do have a team that constantly develops and evolves the platform over time. Mentioned some of the alert sources and use cases, but again, we use it internally at Misto for everything, our CRM, everything.
For the integration,
Yep.
Do you require any professional services to be engaged?
No, it's literally, where are you pointing it to? Username and password in most cases. Some will be different, some will be API secret, API key, but depends on the platform. But you're just pressing a button, connect to that. Like Wildfire is, the HTTPS is already there, you just put in your username and password.
So it supports everything.
Yep. And then you just assign that to a playbook and say, when I get an incident from, or when I want to query that source, what playbook do I kick off? So it's a 2-minute task, really.
It comes with prepackaged, like hundreds of different use case playbooks already. So there's not a lot that you need to do.
In this context, do you see other functions or other departments starting to go, I want to use this, in my department, as it belongs in cyber? Am I making sense?
Yeah, you got, yeah. So,
Something like RPA.
yeah, I'll give you two answers. There's the sales answer, which my sales guys will give is, yes, we want more people on the platform because we license per limit, per user, sorry.
Right.
Our answer would be, yeah, you can interact with them, but they don't have to be users of Misto. Like a CISO, a DPO would never use Misto, but you can still, in an investigation, just have a task that says, at this point, report to that person, or interact with them over Slack, or interact with them over email. So, yes, sales answer and proper answer.
Because I'm thinking more of DevOps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Forbidden Word.
Yep.
Or DevSecOps.
DevSecOps,
Yeah.
yeah.
Into the internal network vulnerabilities and everything, or just at the backbone side, coming from?
You could, yeah, you could. I don't know anyone that has, but you just call a script to do that. But yeah, you'd be having to. What I would do is probably publish it to an AD group. So have an AD group, but then automate that process of adding machines to the AD group to update that patch. But that's quite trivial to do that. That would
probably like we can have integration with SCCM to push the patches. So
Yeah.
any sort of integrations, that sort of integration can be done.
Yeah. So, yep. Cool. I've only got a couple more slides. Yeah. Often when I'm talking to customers, this turns into integration bingo. Oh, do you integrate with my? And so we publish all of these on our website. There's no secrets to what we integrate with. Chances are, 99 times out of 100, we will integrate with whatever you've already purchased. And if we don't, it's not the end of the world because, say, it's quite easy. A lot of the biggest banks have lots of proprietary technology that we then just create custom integrations with. We've got a concept called bring your own integration in Misto, which you can code in Python or JavaScript, or we can help you out with that. Cool. I think that's.
The genetic malware analysis is integrated.
If there's no genetic malware analysis there.
We'll get right on that. Cool.
Thank you, Patrick. So in closing, in the next 5 minutes, I thought maybe what I could do is I could explain a little bit around our thought process of why we acquired. Thank you. So talk to you a little bit about why we acquired the company, right? And what does that mean for Palo Alto Networks' wider cybersecurity strategy? We began on this journey about 12 years ago with our next-gen firewall, as many of you know, and that's what you know us as is a next-gen firewall organization. We expanded that, the evolution of our journey into the endpoint. We introduced a concept and a technology called Traps, which is an endpoint protection primarily solution that focuses more on the type of exploit and what's happening versus signatures and different types of files. We then started focusing on the cloud. So we introduced, over the course of the last, I'd say maybe 2 to 3 years, a different set of services as well as products. Through acquisitions, through organic growth, we basically started building this capability where we can not only just take our firewall and virtualize it in a cloud data center, but then we can also focus on the endpoint or the workload that you have within the cloud and secure that using Traps. We bought a company that focuses on container security, so we can protect that. We bought another company, in fact, on the same day that does serverless security, and so we integrate that. And what's most important amongst all of that is within the cloud, the key challenges that you have is around control, visibility, and compliance. And so we bought both the number one and the number two leaders in that space in an acquisition that we made about a year ago. It was a company called Redlock. So it allows us to not only track where your sensitive data is in the cloud, we can continuously look at compliance, we can look at other functionalities that you would typically look for. And then we already had an integrated CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, in there. So we're quite comprehensive within the cloud cybersecurity market. But unfortunately, what we started realizing is these are, again, siloed products, right? Even within our own organization, we started very quickly realizing that the network and the endpoint need to talk to each other, and of course, the cloud needs to talk as well. And so we introduced this Cortex data lake concept. And again, this is about maybe 2-3 years ago. Started taking all of the 65,000 customers that we have and the data that they're sending us and putting it into a large, strong, contextual platform, or threat intelligence platform. With that data lake, it gives us views that, quite frankly, not many vendors in the security market will have. What we've done in the course of the last almost year now is introduce a concept called XDR. So you have the traditional sort of EDR vendors, which our trap solution can do, but we believe that what you actually need is visibility, forensics level capabilities, and replay capabilities across your entire security stack, which includes the network and it includes the cloud as well. So XDR gives you the visibility to replay those types of threats, to understand what's happening, and then we have applied not AI, but very specific levels of machine learning that will learn from user behavior. So UBA capabilities are primarily built in here that allows us to understand that if you are a bank in the UAE, similar to a bank in Brazil, and that bank in Brazil has just been breached and you all essentially have the same footprint in terms of products and solutions and other technologies, then those patches that that bank needs to do based on the zero-day attack that it's seeing will automatically need to be applied to you ASAP. And so we have SLAs of 5 minutes to basically put that down to not just yourself, but obviously other customers that are affected by that. And it breaks down those silos. So as I said, endpoint protection, network traffic, EDR, and user behavior all in one. That's generally what Cortex XDR provides, right? It has the intelligence of all 4 of those functionalities, and you have the ability of not just from a response perspective, but also from a threat hunting perspective to say, I found this file or I found this indicator of compromise that someone has sent me. Let me do some research to figure out where did it come from? What attack campaign is it affiliated with? What are the specific actions that I need to take? And then can I do that automatically with Misto to actually apply it to my patch? All of that in one single pane of glass, as we've been talking about. And here's how that works, right? So we have Misto on the far left-hand side or the right-hand side for you that talks about that looks at the playbook orchestration, case management, and the collaboration. And on Cortex on the other side that basically takes control and does the investigation, the threat detection as well as the endpoint protection to make sure that those threats are essentially protected. And then to give you a quick use case, this is generally how they all fit together. So if you think about an incident, I won't talk about MITRE just yet, but when you think about an incident, our focus is to use the endpoint in our firewall to stop those threats as quickly as possible. What we don't stop, for various reasons, we will detect and we will accelerate the investigation of as quickly as possible using Cortex, and then obviously we automate whatever response that you want to take, on your environment. And I promised MITRE. We talked about MITRE in the morning. I threw the slide in just for fun. I thought, why not just talk about MITRE since we're talking frameworks? We did fairly well with Cortex. When you compare us to most of the other vendors in the market, we do a good job. So again, I'm not going to. You're welcome to have this report, and we can share that with you guys later as well. And then I think my last slide about us. So as I said, us as a next-gen firewall company, but the organization has really transformed and evolved over the course of the last decade. Firewall is definitely an area that we enjoy and continue to be focused on and have a very strong leadership position in. But we're also very strong when it comes to the endpoint. We're extremely strong now when it comes to the cloud. And then when it comes to securing the future, which is primarily this whole Cortex brand that I just talked about with Misto, we believe we're in a space where we can help our customers secure essentially all of the critical control points in your environment and then also help automate that entire process. I don't know how you define largest, because it's always one of those critical points that I bring up. When I'm in a meeting, normally I ask the person sitting across the table is, how do you define who's the largest? Because when I ask you about who's the largest operating system vendor in the world, you're going to say Microsoft. If I say networking, you're going to say Cisco. If I say others. When I ask about cybersecurity, unfortunately, there is no one clear leader, right? And so the definition of that leadership comes from your own sort of viewpoint. For me, it's basically three areas. I look at revenue. We closed $2.9 billion about a month ago in our fiscal year. We do have the largest revenue. The second largest, I believe now, is Cisco's cybersecurity business, and the one after that is Symantec's enterprise business. I also look at, for example, whether or not they're focused on cybersecurity, or did they start with something else and then kind of layered on cybersecurity. We've been 100% focused on cybersecurity from the beginning. I also look at market cap. If you follow NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange or Dow and kind of compare sort of sizes there, we're about $22 billion in terms of market cap. Again, the largest in our size. Not from a dedicated cybersecurity company. Obviously, Cisco is twice that. And then again, and lastly, I look at the size of the organization. We're about 7,000 employees, pretty much. And we have one of the largest sales forces, if not the largest sales force for cybersecurity, focused on working with customers, planning 3 to 5 year journeys towards this digital cybersecurity strategies. Right? That is us. Any questions?
Question for Patrick.
Yeah.
What's it been like since Palo Alto took over? Has your innovation for the Misto gone up, or has it been held back?
Where's my gun?
Uh-oh. Quick. It's been, everything that was planned has been use cases for Palo Alto customers, because all the engagements I've had, or most of them, probably 90% of them, has been a Palo Alto customer saying, oh, cool, you've acquired something else. That sounds good. Can we have a chat? So the use cases, there's been no engineering effort at all on APIs, because Palo Alto Networks have probably got the best APIs that I've seen. And so it's been, let's get some use cases. Let's automate that firewall response using Palo Alto. Some people they're trying to compare us to like Skybox and stuff like that for firewall assurance. That's something we're looking at, but it's not something that we've developed yet. But yeah, we've not seen, because the engineering teams are still separate at the moment. They're just trying to work on combined things. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool.
If your question is really around, are we still dedicated to supporting third-party vendors? The answer is absolutely yes.
Yep.
So, and again, we understood when we acquired the company that was going to be a key challenge. But internally, which I'm kind of sharing openly here, but as Patrick knows, internally, we've made sure that the guys have their own complete autonomy in the way that they run their business, the way they have their partnerships, and that will continue to stay.
Yeah, a couple of vendors asked us to just sign a contract to make sure that we're not going to then give all the code to anyone else, but we still integrate as well with Checkpoint and everyone else as we did beforehand.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Regarding the Cortex data, where is located?
Google. Yeah, I know. Don't get me started. No, so I'll tell you, the decision was to move to Google about a year ago after our CEO, who is a former Google Chief Revenue Officer, decided that that's the right approach. It doesn't mean we cannot sit on other platforms. We do also sit on AWS. I was being a bit cheeky when I said just Google. But the strategic direction is to essentially migrate as much as possible to Google, because we believe they have the best network, and they have, obviously, in terms of breadth, they have some very advanced or accelerated programs to launch in other parts of the world, including the UAE and Middle East. Any other questions?
Very good. Now, can you just review that question again, please, after everything we've discussed? Is your organization distrustful of automation?
There was a better one, actually.
Go on. What's the question?
50% of partially implemented SOAR. I wanted to know about that.
Yeah, I know. That's the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll discuss that also.
Thank you.
Okay, please open your smartphones. Those of you who have just come in, all the 3 or 4 people, thank you very much.